It was just another average morning in our small, rural town. The sun was barely up, casting a soft orange glow on the sleepy streets. I sat at my desk in history class, idly flipping through the pages of my textbook, not paying much attention. My mind was drifting like it always did. But then, in walked him. Jacob. He was the quiet kid who always kept to himself. Everyone knew who he was, but he was the kind of kid you'd pass in the hallway without a second thought. He wore the same old tattered flannel shirts and jeans every day, his face perpetually downturned like he had something to hide. That day, though, was different. Our teacher, Ms. Jacobs, was already in a mood. It was nearing the end of the semester, and the pressure was building. She had a tendency to snap when students weren't pulling their weight. And Jacob? Well, he was the kind of student who got lost in the shuffle, one who blended in too much to stand out. Jacob, she called out sharply, her voice cutting through the murmur of the class. Can you please pay attention? You're not going to get anywhere with that attitude. Jacob's eyes flicked up, but he said nothing, just a quiet nod before looking back down at his desk. He was always polite, but always silent. Ms. Jacobs didn't like it. Not one bit. Jacob, if you're not going to participate, you can leave, she said, her words more cold than usual. Go back home. We're not babysitting today. I watched as Jacob stood up slowly, his shoulders hunched, and quietly gathered his things. The whole class went silent. No one dared to speak or even make eye contact. He left the room, his boots barely making a sound as he walked out into the hallway. The bell rang a few minutes later, and we all scrambled to pack our things and head to our next class. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The next morning, the entire class was buzzing about Jacob's absence. There was an odd silence, a strange emptiness in the air. No one was used to him being gone. Sure, he was quiet, but he was always there, sitting at the back, his head down, scribbling in his notebook. Ms. Jacobs didn't mention him much. Instead, she pushed on with the lesson, her focus entirely on the board. The lesson went on without a hitch, but I couldn't stop thinking about Jacob. Then, just as the bell rang for lunch, I saw him again. It wasn't his usual walk. There was a sense of purpose in his step. I blinked, unsure if my eyes were playing tricks on me. But there he was, in the parking lot. And something was different. I wasn't the only one who noticed. Students started whispering, pointing. They didn't recognize the car at first. A black Rolls Royce had just pulled into the lot. The kind of car you only see in movies, the kind that screamed money. I froze, my eyes widening. There, standing beside the car, was Jacob. His hair was slicked back, his posture straighter than usual, and he was talking to someone in the driver's seat. His clothes? Not the usual tattered flannel, but a perfectly fitted, dark suit that made him look almost unrecognizable. Is that Jacob? One of my classmates asked. No way. He doesn't even talk to anyone. But there he was. His face, usually hidden behind the curtain of his long hair, was now visible, and he looked different, confident, like someone who didn't belong in the background anymore. The Rolls Royce sat in the parking lot for a few minutes, the engine purring like a tiger ready to pounce. Jacob slipped into the passenger seat, and with a gentle rev of the engine, the car turned and left the lot. For a moment, all I could do was stand there, utterly stunned. Was this some kind of joke? How could Jacob, quiet Jacob, have something like that? Something didn't add up. I wasn't the only one thinking it. Everyone around me was asking the same thing. Who was he really? And why had he never told anyone about this life he was clearly hiding? The entire school day felt like a blur after that. It was as if the mystery of Jacob and the Rolls Royce had cast a shadow over everything else. Whispers followed me through the halls, and by the time the final bell rang, everyone had heard the story. Jacob, the quiet farm kid, was the owner of a Rolls Royce. The whole thing felt too strange to be true. The next morning, as the bell rang for the first class of the day, I took my seat, trying to push the thoughts of Jacob from my mind. But then, the door opened, and in walked Jacob. It was like everything I'd seen yesterday didn't even happen. He was back to his usual self, worn-out flannel, faded jeans, and the same downcast expression that always seemed to make him blend into the background. Ms. Jacobs didn't even flinch. She went on with the lesson like nothing had happened. Jacob walked past the desks and sat in his usual spot at the back of the class, barely making eye contact with anyone. He didn't say a word. The odd thing was, no one dared to ask him about the Rolls Royce. No one brought it up. Maybe they were all too afraid to seem curious, afraid he'd think they were prying into his business. But I couldn't stop thinking about it. How could he go from the quiet kid who sat alone to someone who drove a car that most people would never even sit in? At lunch, a few of my friends and I sat down at our usual table, talking about anything and everything to avoid the topic of Jacob. But I couldn't help it. Did anyone see him yesterday? I asked, trying to keep my voice casual, though I could feel the tension in the air. Yeah, I saw the car, Emily replied. I didn't get it. Maybe it's just a rental. You know how rich people are, they probably just want to show off or something. Doesn't seem like Jacob would do that, I said, but even as I said it, I knew it was more than just a rental. There was something deeper going on. And then, the bell rang. I stood up, pushing the unsettling thoughts aside, determined to focus on my next class. But the questions remained unanswered. Who was Jacob really? Why had he kept this part of his life a secret? The whole thing gnawed at me, like a mystery that was begging to be solved. The rest of the week passed by in a strange haze. Jacob didn't speak to anyone, and no one spoke to him. It was as though an invisible barrier had been put up between him and the rest of us. But the whispers continued, spreading like wildfire through the school. Every student had their own theory about Jacob's sudden wealth. Maybe he'd won the lottery, maybe he was secretly a rich heir, or maybe, just maybe, he was leading a double life that none of us could even begin to understand. I couldn't shake the curiosity gnawing at me. I found myself looking at him during class, wondering how the quiet farm kid could be so connected to something so far out of our reach. His demeanor had changed subtly. There was a confidence to him now, something that hadn't been there before. But at the same time, he still kept to himself, retreating back to his corner in the classroom, away from prying eyes. On Friday, I decided I couldn't leave it alone any longer. I had to find out what was going on, what this was all about. So, after school, I hung back near the parking lot, pretending to walk slowly toward my car while keeping an eye on the entrance. I wasn't the only one. A small crowd had gathered by the fence, all of us waiting for the strange sight to repeat itself. It didn't take long. At exactly the same time as before, the Rolls Royce rolled into the lot. But this time, I saw something that shocked me more than anything I'd seen before. Jacob wasn't walking toward the car this time. Instead, a tall, sharply dressed man, definitely not anyone I recognized from school, got out of the driver's seat. He looked like he could have been Jacob's older brother, but there was something in his posture, the way he moved, that made me think otherwise. I watched as the man went around to the passenger side of the car, opening the door for Jacob, who, once again, looked different. He stepped out of the car, not wearing his usual flannel, but a tailored jacket and slacks that matched the style of the man beside him. His hair was neatly combed back, and his posture was so straight it almost seemed like he'd transformed overnight. I was stunned. Was this really the same kid who sat at the back of class, barely saying a word? He moved with an air of authority now, his presence commanding the attention of everyone around. I didn't dare walk any closer. But as I stood there, I couldn't help but overhear part of their conversation. Remember, no one can know about this. Your life here, your real life, has to stay hidden for now, the man said, his voice low and serious. Jacob nodded, his expression unreadable, but there was a flicker in his eyes that seemed to betray his true feelings. And just like that, the mystery of Jacob deepened. He wasn't just the quiet farm kid. There was something far more complex, something he was hiding from all of us. The question now wasn't what he was hiding, but why. What was it about his life that had to remain a secret? What was he running from? Or was he running toward something? The weekend passed in a blur of unanswered questions and quiet curiosity. I spent most of it trying to piece together everything I'd seen, but nothing made sense. Jacob, the quiet, reserved kid we all knew, was suddenly entangled in a world of luxury and mystery. And the man who'd been with him, the one who seemed so out of place in our small town, kept haunting my thoughts. On Monday morning, I decided to confront him. I waited for the perfect moment, and it came just after history class. Jacob was packing up his bag, getting ready to leave the room in his usual hurry. The rest of the class had already filed out, and the hallways were quiet. I approached him, trying to sound casual, though my heart was racing. "Jacob," I said, my voice steady despite the nerves crawling up my spine. "Hey, can I ask you something?" He looked up from his bag, his expression as neutral as ever. For a second, I thought he might ignore me or brush me off. But instead, he gave a small nod. "What's up?" he asked, his voice soft, but still carrying that undercurrent of confidence I hadn't heard before. "About the Rolls Royce," I said, my words coming out in a rush. "I saw it again. And I don't get it. Why are you driving around in a car like that? I mean, you've never told anyone. It's kind of a big deal." He hesitated for a moment, then sighed, running a hand through his hair. He looked tired, like a weight had been resting on his shoulders for a long time. "It's complicated," he said quietly. "I'm not who you think I am." That was all it took to get me to lean in closer. "What do you mean?" I asked, not able to hold back my curiosity anymore. Jacob took a deep breath and looked around the empty classroom, making sure no one else was listening. "My family, we're not just farmers. We own the land around here, but it's not just for farming. My dad's in a lot of businesses you wouldn't even believe. We have estates, properties, stocks, you name it. And I've been kept out of that world for as long as I can remember." I blinked, trying to process what he was saying. Jacob, the kid who'd spent years sitting at the back of the class, wearing second-hand clothes, never talking, was the heir to some kind of fortune. How could that be possible? "My dad didn't want me to live like him," Jacob continued, his voice tinged with bitterness. "He made me stay away from all of it. I grew up working the farm, doing the hard stuff. I didn't know anything about the family's real business, not until recently." "But why?" I asked, confused. "Why would he keep you away from all that? You could have had anything." Jacob's eyes flickered with something I couldn't quite place: pain? Regret? Maybe both. Because he wanted me to have a normal life. I was supposed to be just like every other kid. No fancy cars, no luxury. He wanted me to be different. But then, after a lot of stuff went wrong with the business, he changed his mind. I had to get involved. I had to learn everything. I could see the weight of his words settle in the space between us. This was more than just a secret life, this was a whole different world that Jacob had been forced to accept. And the more I listened, the more I realized that the quiet kid we all knew wasn't just hiding a luxury car. He was hiding an entire identity. But why not tell anyone? I asked. Why keep it a secret? Jacob shrugged, looking away. People wouldn't understand. They wouldn't know what to do with it. And I don't want to be treated any differently just because of who my family is. I felt a mix of awe and sympathy for him. Jacob had lived an entire life under the shadow of a secret, trying to fit in with the rest of us when all along, he was part of something far bigger, something he hadn't chosen. "I'm not like you, okay?" he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I just want to be normal. I want to go to school, make friends, not be the rich kid, not be the kid with a target on his back. That's why I keep it all under wraps. I nodded, finally understanding. It was easier to keep quiet, to stay hidden in the back of the room, away from the world that expected more from him. But now, things had changed. And I knew that Jacob couldn't hide forever. As I walked away from him, I could still feel the weight of his words hanging in the air. Jacob had chosen to stay in the shadows, but sooner or later, the world would find out who he really was. And when that happened, it was going to shake this small town to its core. The days after our conversation felt like they were passing in slow motion. Jacob had opened up to me, but even though I knew more, it felt like there was so much still left unsaid. The weight of his secret hung between us, and it seemed like he was trying to go on as if everything was normal, while I couldn't stop thinking about what he had told me. But that wasn't the strangest part. The real twist came when, on Monday morning, Jacob wasn't at school. I noticed it almost immediately. His desk was empty, his seat still warm, but there was no sign of him. Ms. Jacobs went on with the lesson as if everything was fine, but a strange tension filled the room. No one brought it up, but I could tell everyone was thinking the same thing: where was Jacob? It wasn't just that he was absent, it was the manner of his absence. He didn't even send a note or call in sick. For someone who usually kept a low profile, this felt out of character. Was he avoiding something? Had his family decided to pull him from school altogether? I found myself staring at the door more than I should have, waiting for him to walk through it, waiting for some sign that he was just running late. But the minutes ticked by, and there was no sign of him. By lunchtime, whispers started to spread again, and this time they were sharper, more urgent. "Did you hear? Jacob's gone," Emily whispered across the table. "His car's not even in the lot. His family's house is all locked up." I wasn't sure what to believe. Jacob had told me that he was keeping a low profile, but this felt different. Why would his family take him away so suddenly? Had something happened with the business? Had they decided that it was time for him to live in the world they'd kept hidden from him? Later that afternoon, I decided to go to the one place I knew I could get answers: the farm. It wasn't far, just a short walk past the edge of town. His family owned a large spread of land, stretching far enough that you could never see the whole property from the road. It was a quiet, lonely place, and I figured it was where Jacob would go if he needed to hide. When I arrived, the first thing I noticed was the silence. The large barn where they kept the equipment was dark, and the fields looked untouched. No one was around. I walked closer to the house, trying to ignore the nervous lump in my throat. Something felt off. Just as I was about to knock on the door, I heard voices from the side of the house. I turned quickly, and there, standing in the shadows by the large oak tree, was Jacob. But he wasn't alone. The man who had been with him, the one who'd driven the Rolls Royce, was there too, speaking to him in low, urgent tones. I stood frozen, just outside their line of sight, listening in. "Jacob, this is your life now," the man said. "You're going to have to make some decisions. It's not just about you anymore. It's about the company, the empire your family built. You've got a place in all of it." Jacob's voice was low, but I could hear the tension in it. "I don't want any of it. I want to go back to school. I want to go back to being just me." There was a long pause, and then Jacob spoke again. "I don't know if I can do this. I don't want this life." The man sighed heavily. "You don't have a choice anymore. It's time you learned what it really means to be part of this family." I felt a chill run down my spine. Jacob wasn't just trying to escape a life of luxury, he was being pulled into it, and he didn't want it. And it was clear now that whatever secrets his family had, they weren't going to let him live a normal life again. Not now. Not ever. Before I could process any more of the conversation, Jacob turned and walked back toward the house. The man followed him, and I quickly ducked behind a tree, my heart pounding in my chest. This wasn't just about Jacob's secret wealth. It was about something much darker, something much bigger than him. Whatever his family was involved in, they weren't going to let him escape so easily. I knew, then, that I had to find out more. But I also knew one thing for sure: Jacob's life was about to change forever, and it wasn't going to be a simple story of a kid with a rich family. It was something much more complicated, and the deeper I went, the more dangerous it seemed to become. The next few days were a blur of confusion and mounting anxiety. Jacob didn't return to school, and I heard no word from him. The whispers grew louder: he'd disappeared, just like that, without a trace. Some people said he had been sent off to a private school. Others speculated that his family had pulled him out entirely to shield him from whatever was happening. But no one knew for sure. I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd overheard that afternoon at the farm. "It's not just about you anymore," the man had said. "It's about the company." What did that mean? What had Jacob's family really built? And what kind of power did they hold to force him into a life he didn't want? My thoughts were interrupted one afternoon when I found a letter on my doorstep. It was an envelope, plain and unmarked, but when I opened it, I found Jacob's handwriting inside, hurried and scrawled as if written in a rush. My fingers trembled as I read it. "I'm sorry I never told you. I know you're probably confused, but things have gotten out of hand. My family, they have control over a lot more than you think. The land, the businesses, they're involved in things that I can't explain, things I don't want to be a part of. They've forced me into a role I don't want. You were right about one thing: I was hiding a life. But not for the reasons you think. I thought I could escape, but it's too late now. They're watching me. They're watching us. Please stay away. It's safer that way. I can't protect you." The letter ended abruptly, with no signature, no more explanation. My heart pounded in my chest. What did he mean? Why was he warning me to stay away? I couldn't just ignore it. I couldn't leave things like this. But now, it seemed like Jacob had crossed some line he couldn't come back from, and the more I thought about the people involved in his life, the more I realized how deep this went. His family wasn't just wealthy, they were powerful. There were forces at play here that none of us could fully comprehend. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every shadow in my room seemed to hide a secret, every creak in the house made me jump. I kept thinking back to the man I had seen at the farm. The authority in his voice, the way Jacob had followed him without question, it was like a leash tightening around him, keeping him from ever breaking free. The next day, I made a decision. I had to see Jacob again. But this time, I would go to him. I wasn't going to wait around and hope that he would come back. I needed answers, and I wasn't going to let this mystery consume me any longer. I drove out to the farm, my heart pounding in my chest. As I pulled up the gravel driveway, I noticed something strange. The house was dark, darker than usual. No lights were on, and the front door was wide open. I pulled the car to a stop, but before I could get out, I saw a figure in the shadows. It was Jacob. He stood in the doorway, staring at me. His face was pale, his eyes hollow. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. The last time I had seen him, he had been distant, but now he looked broken. "You shouldn't have come," he said, his voice shaking. He stepped out onto the porch, his eyes darting around nervously. "They'll know. They're watching." I took a step toward him, my voice low. "Jacob, what's going on? What's happening?" "I can't tell you," he whispered, looking over his shoulder as if expecting someone to appear. "You don't know what you're asking. You don't know who they are." He took a deep breath and stepped closer, his eyes locking onto mine with an intensity one had never seen before. "You have to stay away. They won't stop until they get what they want. And I can't stop them. I can't even protect myself." I wanted to reach out, to tell him everything would be okay, but I knew it wouldn't be. Whatever Jacob was involved in, it was bigger than both of us. And now that I knew, I was a part of it too. Suddenly, a car engine roared in the distance, breaking the tense silence. Jacob's face turned pale, his eyes wide with fear. "They're here," he muttered under his breath, his body stiffening. "I have to go." Before I could react, he turned and ran back into the house, slamming the door behind him. I stood frozen for a moment, trying to process everything. What had I just heard? What had I just seen? And then, without thinking, I got back in my car and drove away, the sound of my tires crunching on the gravel, the knowledge that I had just crossed a line I couldn't uncross. I didn't know what was coming next, but I knew one thing: things were about to spiral out of control. And I had no idea where Jacob's story would end. The days that followed felt like a blur of tension and dread. I couldn't escape the feeling that I had just scratched the surface of something far more dangerous than I could handle. Jacob's words echoed in my mind: "They're watching. I can't protect you." I felt the weight of that warning pressing down on me, but there was no turning back. I couldn't leave things like this, not without knowing what was going on. Not without understanding what Jacob had been dragged into. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The way he'd looked at me when he warned me to stay away, there was fear in his eyes. A fear that seemed too real to ignore. It wasn't just about the family's wealth. It wasn't just about secrets hidden behind the gates of that sprawling estate. No, this was about something darker, something more sinister. And now, I was tangled in it too. I decided to go back to the farm, to confront whatever this was head-on. That night, I drove out to the property again. The air was thick with the weight of silence, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. When I pulled up to the house, the lights were on. A soft glow spilled from the windows, illuminating the front yard. This time, I didn't hesitate. I got out of the car and walked toward the front door. Before I could knock, the door swung open. Jacob stood there, his face a mask of resignation. He looked exhausted, like he hadn't slept in days, but there was a strange calmness about him. "You shouldn't have come," he said, but his voice lacked the urgency it had before. He didn't seem afraid anymore. He seemed defeated. "I'm not leaving until you tell me everything," I said, my voice firm despite the pit in my stomach. "What is going on, Jacob? What's your family involved in?" He looked over his shoulder, his eyes darting nervously toward the driveway. "You don't understand. You never will. But if you want to know," he paused, as if deciding something. "I'll show you." I stepped inside, and for the first time, I saw the inside of the house. It was grand, but it felt cold, sterile. There were no personal touches, no warmth. Just empty space and expensive furniture. It felt like a place where people didn't live, they merely existed. Jacob led me down a long corridor to a door at the end. He opened it, revealing a room filled with files and stacks of paperwork. The walls were lined with black and white photos of buildings, contracts, and maps of land, business dealings that stretched across the state, maybe farther. "This is what my family really does," Jacob said, his voice low. "They've built an empire. They don't just own farms or real estate, they own industries. They have a hand in politics, in banking, in things that control everything." I stared at the papers, my mind spinning. This was more than wealth. This was power on a scale I couldn't comprehend. "And you're a part of this," I said quietly. Jacob nodded. "I never wanted any of it. But they made sure I would be part of it. They forced me into it. And now, they're making me choose. Either I take control, or they'll take it all from me. And if I refuse," he trailed off, his face hardening, "they'll ruin everything. Everyone I care about." My heart sank. "And you're stuck." "I don't know what to do anymore," Jacob said, his voice breaking. "I've tried to fight it. But they always find a way to pull me back in. I'm not the person I used to be. I'm not that kid anymore." We stood there in silence, the weight of his words hanging in the air. There was no easy way out of this. Jacob was trapped, caught in a web of power and corruption that he couldn't escape. Then, I saw something in his eyes, a glimmer of hope. "I don't want this life for you," he said suddenly, looking at me with a determination that felt out of place in this dark room. "You need to leave. Now. Get out before they get to you." I shook my head. "I'm not leaving you. Not like this." His face softened for a moment, a brief flash of the Jacob I once knew, but then it hardened again. He stepped toward me, taking my hand. "This is your choice, but I can't protect you anymore. You need to understand, the moment you're involved, there's no going back. You won't get a second chance." I squeezed his hand. "I'm not afraid." But deep down, I was. I was afraid of what this could mean for us, for everything. The darkness that surrounded Jacob had already started to creep into my life, and I knew that no matter how much I wanted to help him, there was nothing I could do to fix what had been broken. "I'm sorry," Jacob whispered, his voice filled with regret. "I wanted more for you. I wanted you to stay away." And just like that, he turned and walked back into the shadows of his family's empire, leaving me standing in the cold, knowing that whatever choice I made now would shape the rest of my life. As I left the farm, I couldn't help but wonder if Jacob would ever be free. And more importantly, if either of us would survive the consequences of being tangled in a world that was so far out of our control. The mystery had been solved, but the cost of knowing the truth was far higher than I ever could have imagined.